He threw her into the rain like she was nothing, like she was less than nothing. One cold look, two words, and a homeless 18-year-old girl got shoved back into the midnight storm by men in expensive suits who didn't even bother to remember her face. But Lucien Veyer, the most feared mafia boss in Greyhaven, was about to discover that the girl he dismissed without a second thought was the only person standing between him and a bullet in a dark alley. Here's what nobody tells you about power. It makes you blind. And blindness, sooner or later, will cost you everything. If you were that girl, soaked to the bone, pushed back into the rain by a man surrounded by armed guards, would you have walked away or would you have stayed? Before we get into this story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. And after you've heard this one, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that rainy night in Greyhaven. The rain had been falling since 8 o'clock, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself, that just arrives and settles in like an unwanted guest who knows exactly how long they're going to stay. By midnight, the streets of Greyhaven had turned into something that looked like the city was melting. Black pavement reflecting yellow streetlights, headlights smearing across puddles, neon signs bleeding color into the gutters. Talia Rook had learned, through months of hard and humbling experience, that the difference between a bad night and a survivable one usually came down to a single dry patch of concrete, a doorway, an awning, something overhead to break the fall of the water. The Marrow Crown Hotel had one of the best awnings in the downtown district, wide enough to shelter 4 or 5 people comfortably, lit by warm amber lights that made even the wet sidewalk look almost dignified. Talia had discovered it 6 weeks ago on a night similar to this one, and she'd learned that if she stayed quiet, kept her back against the wall, and didn't look at any of the hotel guests directly, the security staff would sometimes leave her alone for 20 minutes at a stretch. 20 minutes of dry was 20 minutes of dry. You learned not to be proud about it. She had her backpack pulled against her chest the way she always did in public. Instinct more than strategy at this point, the same way a person unconsciously covers their pockets on a crowded subway. The bag held everything she owned that mattered. Her mother's nursing manual, a change of clothes sealed in a Ziploc bag, a small first aid kit she had assembled piece by piece from pharmacy sample shelves and the occasional shelter donation table, and a photograph of her mother taken outside the hospital where Mara Rook had worked for 11 years. Talia didn't look at the photograph often, but she kept it close. She had been standing under the awning for maybe 12 minutes when the first black SUV pulled up. Then another. Then a third. The vehicles arrived with that particular smoothness that money produces. Not loud, not aggressive, just inevitable, the way a tide comes in. The doors opened and men stepped out first, before any passenger, moving with the practiced efficiency of people whose entire professional purpose was to stand between a specific person and the rest of the world. Talia noticed things. She had always noticed things, even before the last 18 months had sharpened that tendency into something closer to a survival mechanism. Her mother used to joke about it. Baby, you'd notice if someone changed one thread in the carpet. And Talia had learned, since losing everything, that the joke was less funny and more accurate than either of them had understood at the time. So she noticed the men before she noticed the man they were protecting. She noticed the way they spaced themselves. She noticed which ones were watching the street versus the door versus the upper windows of the building across the avenue. She noticed the driver of the second vehicle, a man in his late 30s with a carefully trimmed beard and a gray jacket, who stood slightly apart from the others and kept touching the left side of his chest. Not the way a man checks that his earpiece is in place, but lower, and with a quality of self-consciousness, the kind of unconscious gesture that happens when a person is trying not to draw attention to something they're very aware of. She filed it away. Then Lucien Veyer stepped out of the rear door of the center vehicle, and she understood what kind of operation this was. She didn't know his name yet. She would learn it later. What she understood in that first moment was simpler and older than names. This was a man who expected the world to organize itself around his presence. Not arrogantly. Arrogance implies an awareness of other people that produces the need to perform. This man wasn't performing. He simply moved through space as though the question of whether it would accommodate him had been settled a long time ago. Charcoal suit. No tie. Dark hair with the first traces of silver at the temples. the kind that looks distinguished on a man who has earned it through difficult years rather than easy ones. He was maybe 34, 35, and he carried himself with the specific stillness of someone who has learned that most problems, if you wait long enough, will resolve themselves one way or another, and that the ones that don't are handled privately, without ceremony. His eyes swept the entrance area once. They passed over Talia without stopping. She had grown accustomed to that. It still landed somewhere in her chest, every time, like a small flat stone dropped into still water. The ripple was quick, and it was quiet, and it disappeared. One of the hotel's security men, not the man's private security, but the hotel's own, younger, a little too eager in his navy blazer, stepped toward Talia. "Ma'am, this entrance is reserved for hotel guests." "I know," Talia said. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. I need you to move along now." She looked past him at the awning, at the rain beyond it, at the darkness where the nearest alternative shelter was at least 6 blocks away. She made a calculation. 5 minutes, she said. Just 5 minutes out of the rain. She wasn't asking for much. She knew she wasn't asking for much. She had made herself small and quiet, and she had kept her hands visible and her voice level, and she had not, at any point, caused a single problem for a single person standing under that overhang. The man in the charcoal suit had almost reached the hotel doors. He slowed, not quite stopping, in the way that a person slows when something peripheral registers without quite demanding full attention. "This entrance is for guests," he said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He said it the way a person says close the window or it's getting late, a statement of obvious fact directed at anyone in earshot who might find it useful. Then he kept walking. And that was it. That was all. 2 of his security men were already moving toward Talia, and they were not as politely distant as the hotel's man had been. One of them took her by the arm, not roughly, but firmly, with the absolute conviction that he was authorized to do this and that his authorization was beyond question, and walked her backward past the edge of the awning. The rain hit her immediately. It was cold. It was the particular cold of being wet in a city at midnight in autumn, which is a cold that gets into things, into the collar of your coat, into the spaces between your fingers, into the place behind your ears. Talia stood on the sidewalk beyond the awning's edge, and for a moment she simply stood there, absorbing the sensation of it, which was not new and was not the worst thing she had ever felt, and was not, she told herself, worth losing composure over. She took a breath. She looked back at the entrance. The man in the charcoal suit had disappeared through the hotel's glass doors. His convoy was still organized at the curb, drivers and guards maintaining their positions. And there was the man with the beard and the gray jacket, standing near the second SUV, still slightly apart from the others. He had his phone in his hand now. He wasn't talking. He was typing. And the way he was doing it, the angle of his body, the deliberateness of it, the glance he cut sideways before his thumbs moved, told Talia, with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent the last year watching people in order to understand whether they were safe or dangerous, that he was sending a message he did not want anyone to see him send. She watched him finish, watched him pocket the phone, watched him resume his previous posture as though the last 30 seconds had not occurred. The convoy pulled away from the curb 60 seconds later, smooth and quiet and inevitable, dissolving into the wet night. Talia stood in the rain and thought about the nervous driver, about the way his hand had gone to his chest, not to an earpiece, not to a weapon. Lower, inner jacket pocket, a phone he wasn't supposed to be using, or something else he wasn't supposed to have. She thought about the way he had positioned himself apart from the others, and the way he had looked sideways before he typed. And she thought about the fact that none of the private security men had appeared to notice. And she thought about the man who had said this entrance is for guests, and walked away. She pushed her wet hair back from her face and started walking. Not because she had somewhere to go. She hadn't had somewhere to go in a long time. But standing still in the rain served no practical purpose, and Talia Rook had learned, since losing her home and her mother and the life she had expected to live, that the only way to survive a night that wanted to beat you was to keep moving through it. She made it 4 blocks before the sky opened up fully, and she ducked into the covered entrance of a shuttered pharmacy and sat on the concrete step with her backpack between her knees and watched the water pour down across the empty street. She was not thinking about the man in the charcoal suit. She was thinking about the driver. She couldn't have explained why it mattered. It probably didn't matter. People in expensive suits sent secret messages all the time for reasons that had nothing to do with anything Talia needed to concern herself with. She was not a detective. She was not an informant. She was 18 years old, and she was sitting in a doorway in the rain, and she had $17 and a granola bar and her mother's medical textbook and the photograph. She was not, by any reasonable measure, a person whose job it was to care about nervous drivers. But she had noticed it. And noticing things, her mother used to say, is the first step toward everything that matters. You can't help someone you haven't seen, baby. You can't fix something you're pretending isn't broken. Mara Rook had said that in the context of nursing, in the context of being the kind of medical professional who actually looked at patients instead of through them. But Talia had found, in the rough schooling of the last 18 months, that it applied more broadly than that. She sat in the doorway for a long time. She was still there, almost 2 hours later, when she heard the first sounds from 3 blocks over that did not belong to an ordinary night. It started as a distant crash, the sound of something heavy impacting something stationary, not an accident, not the random percussion of city life, but the kind of sound that is produced when force is applied to a structure by someone who wants the structure to stop existing as a barrier. Then voices, urgent and directional, moving fast. Then silence. Then the sound of running. Talia got to her feet. She told herself she wasn't going to look. She went to look. The block she turned onto was dark in the specific way of power that has been deliberately cut, not failed. No gradual dimming, no partial outage, just gone, all at once. The streetlights and the lit windows of the ground floor shops and the glowing sign of the parking garage on the corner, all of it absent simultaneously. The darkness had texture. It pressed. She could hear people moving in it, multiple people, organized, deliberate. She stayed against the building and moved carefully. She found him in the alley behind the restaurant supply warehouse, a narrow passage between dumpsters overflowing with cardboard and compressed foam, the kind of alley that exists in every city and that nobody ever looks at twice. I was down on one knee with his left hand pressed against his right side, and his breath coming in the controlled, focused way of someone who is managing a significant amount of pain through willpower alone. The charcoal suit was torn at the shoulder. There was blood on his right hand where it held the wall. He heard her approach and had something in his other hand instantly. She didn't look at it directly because she understood, with some instinct that bypassed rational calculation, that looking at it directly was the wrong move. "Easy," she said. I'm nobody. I was sheltering in the pharmacy down the street. I heard the noise." He didn't lower whatever he was holding. "You're the girl from the hotel," he said. His voice was different than it had been under the awning. Still controlled, but with something underneath it now that the control couldn't entirely contain. "Yeah," Talia said. "The one you threw into the rain." A pause. "I didn't throw you." "Your guys did." Another pause. Shorter. "Fair," he said. She could hear from somewhere on the adjacent block voices moving in a pattern she was beginning to recognize. Methodical, like people who were searching a grid. Not random. Organized. "Those men looking for you?" she asked. "Not your problem." "You're bleeding on your problem. I'm looking at it." She unslung her backpack. He watched her do it with an expression she couldn't fully read in the dark. Not quite suspicion, not quite surprise. Something between the two, colored by the particular disbelief of a man who has built his entire professional life on the principle that people act in their self-interest and is encountering evidence that might complicate that theory. "I have a first aid kit," she said. "It's not much, but it's something." She said it the way her mother had taught her to talk to frightened patients, not making it a question, not making it a performance, just stating facts in a voice that did not wobble, because a voice that wobbles transfers fear, and fear is the last thing an injured person needs. "Why?" he asked. It was a genuine question. She could tell the difference by now. "Because you're hurt," she said, "and because those people out there are connected to the man from your convoy. The one with the beard and the gray jacket. He was sending messages he didn't want your security to see. I noticed." Silence. From the adjacent block, the voices moved, still searching, getting slightly closer. "There's a maintenance room," Talia said, 40 feet down this alley, around the corner of the warehouse. "I've used it before. The lock is broken and nobody checks it." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. She did not look away, because looking away was the wrong move, and she had learned that particular lesson young. Lead, he said. She did. The maintenance room smelled of oil and rust and the particular dampness of a space that has been cold and unoccupied for a long time. Talia got the door closed behind them, and in the darkness she worked by feel, by memory, finding the broken overhead light's pull chain and confirming that it no longer functioned, then locating her flashlight, a small one, not much bigger than a marker, and using that instead, keeping it angled low. He sat on an overturned plastic crate with the specific economy of movement of a man who is conserving strength. She got her first aid kit out and began looking at the wound by flashlight. Not a bullet, a cut, deep, from something with an edge, probably glass or a blade that didn't complete what it started. Deep enough to need proper stitching eventually, not deep enough to kill him in the next hour if it was properly dressed. She told him this. "You know that from looking?" he said. "My mother was an ER nurse for 11 years, Talia said. She taught me how to look." She was already opening the antiseptic wipe, just one. She had to ration them. And the wound was going to hurt, and she didn't warn him because she had learned from watching her mother that warning people about pain sometimes made it worse, and because he didn't strike her as a man who needed warning. He didn't make a sound when the antiseptic hit. She worked quietly and quickly. She had learned that too. Wasted motion in a medical situation costs more than it gives back. He watched her work with the expression of a man who is revising something he had previously concluded. "How long have you been living rough?" he asked. She looked up briefly. 8 months. Before that? We had an apartment, my mother and me. She kept her hands moving. She died 14 months ago. The hospital bills and the back rent caught up at about the same time. He was quiet. Relatives? He asked. Gone. Social services? She didn't answer that immediately. The silence contained its own answer. I tried, she finally said. For a while. She secured the dressing and sat back. Outside, the searching voices had moved further away. Whatever grid they were working, they had passed this section, for now. The man from your convoy, she said, the driver with the beard. I saw him talking to someone else tonight, before you came out of the hotel. I was there for about 40 minutes before you arrived. He looked at her. Who? He said. I don't know names. Taller man? Dark coat? They were around the corner of the building. I noticed them because the driver looked like he was trying not to be noticed, which is, she paused, the thing that makes you notice someone. Something shifted in his expression, something that had nothing to do with the wound. What did they look like? He said. The man in the dark coat. She described what she'd seen. She was good at description, specific, unhurried, the kind of detail that comes from actually looking at something rather than constructing a memory of it after the fact. By the time she finished, the man in the charcoal suit was sitting very still. You're certain, he said. I'm not certain of anything, Talia said. I'm telling you what I saw. He reached into his jacket with his uninjured arm, pulled out a phone. I need to contact my lieutenant. Talia put her hand on the phone. He looked at her hand, then at her. The look was not warm. The man I described, she said quietly. I saw him again, later, before I heard the noise that brought me here. She paused. He was with the men who are searching for you right now. The flashlight was small, and its light was unsteady, but she could see his face clearly enough. The realization moving through it was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the look of a man watching something he believed to be solid ground reveal itself as air. Corvin, he said. Not a question. The name came out of him quietly, the way a word comes out when a person isn't quite intending to speak. Outside in the dark alley, the rain hammered the dumpster lids. Neither of them moved. And somewhere on the other side of the warehouse wall, a phone began to ring, his lieutenant's name on the screen. And Lucien Vere, the most feared man in Greyhaven, sat in a broken maintenance room in the dark, with a homeless girl's hand on his phone, and understood for the first time in a very long time that the things he had been certain of might not be certain at all. He didn't answer. The ringing stopped. 20 seconds later, they heard footsteps in the alley directly outside. Multiple pairs, moving slowly, searching. Talia switched off the flashlight. In the absolute dark, neither of them breathed. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Talia could feel the man beside her. Lucian, she would learn his name properly only later, when names started to matter again. She could feel him without touching him, the way you feel heat from something that hasn't yet made contact. He had gone absolutely still. Not the stillness of someone holding their breath out of fear, but the specific weighted stillness of a man who had trained himself over many years to become invisible by simply refusing to make noise. She had learned a different version of that same skill. Hers came from months of sleeping in places where being discovered meant being moved along, being sighted, occasionally being handled by someone who didn't consider her worth gentleness. His came from something she didn't know yet, and could only sense the outline of, the way you sense the shape of a large object in a dark room before your eyes have fully adjusted. Neither of them moved. The footsteps outside weren't random. That was what made them different from ordinary street noise, from the shuffling of anyone passing through an alley on a wet night for ordinary reasons. These footsteps had a cadence to them, a methodical quality, the sound of someone who was not walking somewhere but rather walking through somewhere, covering it, accounting for it. A search pattern. Talia had heard that kind of movement before, in the weeks she'd spent in the warehouse district closer to the waterfront, where security patrols walked the perimeter of storage facilities with the same deliberate rhythm. She had learned to recognize it. She had learned to go still when she heard it. She went still now. A flashlight beam swept under the door gap. Thin, moving slowly from left to right, then back. Lucian's hand found her wrist in the dark. Not grabbing, just contact, the kind that says don't move without words, because words were the one thing that could end everything. She hadn't been planning to move. The beam disappeared. The footsteps continued past. There were two sets, she decided. Two people, maybe three, moving close together, which meant they were not spreading out to cover ground, but concentrating on this specific section of the alley. Someone had told them to look here. Someone who knew the general area, if not the exact location. 40 seconds. Maybe 50. Then the footsteps moved on, turned the far corner of the alley, and the sound of them diminished by degrees, until the only thing left was the rain on the dumpster lids and the distant, ordinary noise of the city carrying on its business without any awareness of what was happening in this particular dark corner of it. Lucian released her wrist. Neither of them spoke for another full minute. When Talia finally turned on the flashlight again, a small, cautious wedge of it, aimed at the floor, she could see that he had not relaxed. His posture was exactly what it had been when the footsteps were outside. Contained, coiled, conserving. "They'll come back," he said. His voice was low and flat and stated it as fact, not speculation. "I know," she said. "How well do you know this building?" "Well enough. I've been in this section of the district for about 3 months." She paused, considering. "There's a laundry room connected to the old textile facility 2 buildings over, accessible from a fire exit at the north end of this alley. The facility's been condemned for 2 years. The city padlocked the main entrance, but the east loading door has a broken latch." He looked at her. It was the same look from earlier, the look of revision, of a man updating a calculation that he had believed was already final. "Why do you know that?" he asked. "Because when you don't have anywhere to go," Talia said, without bitterness, just the flat accuracy of someone describing weather, "you learn the geography of places other people walk past without looking at." Something moved across his expression. It was brief, and he controlled it quickly, but she caught it. She was good at catching things people controlled quickly. It was, in her experience, usually the most honest part of what they were feeling. "Can you walk?" she asked. He stood up from the plastic crate without using the wall for support, which told her more than a direct answer would have. He was managing the pain. He would continue managing it. Whether that was admirable or simply a feature of the kind of life he lived, she didn't know yet. "Let's move," he said. She went first. The north end of the alley was clear. She checked it in the way she had taught herself to check spaces. Not the quick glance of someone who is looking for reassurance, but the slower, scanning assessment of someone who genuinely needs to know. She moved along the wall, Lucian close behind her, close enough that she could hear the slight change in his breathing that happened when he moved too quickly or twisted the wrong way, a barely perceptible catch that he was working very hard to prevent from becoming audible. She slowed her pace slightly. Not enough that he would need to acknowledge it. Just enough. The fire exit was where she remembered it. The door was heavy, and its hinges were rusted in the way of things that have been exposed to decades of coastal air, and it opened with a sound that felt enormous in the wet silence of the alley. She held it for him, and they moved through it into the building's interior, which was a different kind of dark. Not the outdoor dark of clouds and rain overhead, but the enclosed dark of a space that had been sealed and abandoned, layered with dust and the smell of machine oil and old fiber. She knew the layout by feel. 12 steps forward, turn left, 6 steps, step over the raised threshold of the interior doorway, then right. And the laundry room was at the end of the corridor. A large industrial space with ancient commercial washers lined against the walls like rusted sentinels, all of them long since dead. She found the corner she had used before. There was a space behind the largest machine, an ancient Huebsch that must have weighed 800 pounds and wasn't going anywhere, where the metal of the machine's body created a partial barrier against both line of sight from the doorway and the worst of the cold drafts that moved through the building's broken windows. Lucian lowered himself to the floor against the wall. This time, he used the machine for support. He didn't apologize for it. She respected that. False shows of strength in a situation like this one were a waste of energy that nobody could afford. "Tell me again what you saw," he said. "The man in the dark coat." "Everything." She told him again. She was careful with her words. Specific, sequential, not editorializing, giving him the raw material of observation rather than conclusions. She described the posture of the two men when they were speaking. She described the driver's body language afterward, the way he had touched his inner jacket pocket 3 times in the following 10 minutes, not checking, just aware of something being there. "You said the man in the dark coat was tall," Lucian said. "How tall?" "Taller than you, maybe 3 inches. And he moved differently than the people around him, like he was used to people stepping out of his way." Lucian was quiet. In the silence, Talia could hear the rain against the building's roof, finding the gaps in the old corrugated metal, dripping into internal spaces. She could hear Lucian breathing. She could hear her own heartbeat, which was slower than she might have expected, and she recognized this as the particular calm that had descended on her during crises since she was 16 years old and had sat in an emergency room for 9 hours, while her mother underwent surgery, and had understood, somewhere during those hours, that panic was a feeling she could feel and still function through. "The man you described," Lucian said finally, "has been with me for 12 years. He said it without inflection, which was, she was learning, how he said things that cost him. "I'm sorry," Talia said. "Don't be. Not yet." He paused. "Maybe you're wrong." "Maybe," she said. "I might be. Might be. I'm telling you what I saw." "You keep saying that." "Because it's the only honest thing I can tell you." He looked at her for a moment in the dimness. His phone had a small standby light that gave just enough ambient glow to see faces by, and she could see that he was doing something she hadn't yet seen him do. He was genuinely uncertain. Not about her, or not only about her, about something much larger than her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Talia. Talia Rook." "Lucian Veyer." He said it as though it were simply information, not expecting a reaction. She didn't give him one, though she noted it. She would think about it later, what that name meant in this city. Right now it was just a name. "My mother's name was Mara," she said, not sure why she said it, except that the exchange of names in a dark room had opened something briefly, and she found herself filling it before it closed again. "She was at Greyhaven General for 11 years, ER ward." He looked at her. "The night I got you out of the alley," he said slowly. "What would you have done if I'd been—" He paused. "Someone else." "Someone dangerous, you mean?" "Yes." "I would still have helped," she said. "I would have been more careful about it, but I would have helped." "That's not smart." "Probably not," she agreed. "Why?" She thought about it honestly, not the answer that sounded right, but the actual answer. "Because my mother spent her whole career in a room where people came in broken and scared and sometimes very dangerous," she said. "She used to say that the moment you start deciding whose pain is worth responding to, you've already become less than what you're supposed to be." She paused. "I don't know if she was right, but it's what I've got." Lucian said nothing. Then his phone lit up. Not a call. A text notification. He looked at the screen and something happened to his face that was specific and controlled, and that Talia, watching from 3 feet away, recognized as the look of someone receiving information that confirmed something they were hoping would not be confirmed. He turned the phone so she couldn't see the screen, which was fair. It wasn't her business, but the way his jaw set told her enough. "My security division," he said. "The men who are searching this neighborhood tonight, 2 of them have been identified. They belong to a crew that operates for a rival organization." He stopped. A rival organization that, as of 6 weeks ago, was supposedly in a truce negotiation with mine. Talia processed this. Negotiated by who? The pause was its own answer. "Corvin," he said. The name sat in the air between them. Outside the laundry room, something moved in the corridor. Both of them went still simultaneously. It was an animal, a cat, or a large rat. Something that scraped briefly against the baseboard and then was gone. But the half-second of absolute silence that had preceded their going still was very loud in retrospect. "We can't stay here all night," Talia said. "No." "Where do you need to get to?" He thought for a moment. She could see him calculating, prioritizing, running through a checklist of something in his mind with the efficiency of a man who had trained himself to think under pressure. "There's a warehouse," he said. "East side, about 1.5 miles from here. It runs under a logistics company. Legitimate. Nothing connected to—" He paused, choosing words. "The parts of my operation that Corvin would have had access to. There's a secure emergency phone there, hardlined. No digital trace." 1.5 miles, Talia said. "Yes." "Through streets where people are currently looking for you." "Yes." She thought about the geography. She knew this part of Greyhaven, not from a map, but from the ground, from months of navigating it at night, from learning which blocks had active security cameras and which didn't, which service routes connected which buildings, which condemned structures still had usable interior passageways. It was a different kind of knowledge than the kind that came from planning, from intention. It was the knowledge of someone who had been forced into the city's hidden infrastructure and had mapped it simply by living inside it. "I know a way," she said. "It's not direct, but it keeps us off the main streets and away from the camera grids on Harlow and Ninth." He looked at her. "You know where the camera grids are," he said. Not quite a question. "You learn things," she said again, "when you have to." Something shifted in him then. She couldn't name it precisely, but it was the quality of a man who has made a decision. Not the kind of decision he's proud of, but the kind that the situation has stripped down to its essential facts and left him with only one reasonable answer. "Lead," he said. For the second time that night, they moved. The route she took him through was not the route anyone watching the streets of Greyhaven for a limping man in a ruined charcoal suit would have anticipated. It went through the back of the condemned textile building, up an interior staircase that was missing 2 of its steps and required careful navigation even in daylight, across a rooftop connected to an adjacent structure by an old maintenance bridge, a narrow thing, corrugated metal, that swayed slightly in the wind and that Talia crossed with the practiced balance of someone who had crossed it before, and Lucian crossed with the concentrated deliberation of a man who was not going to let a bridge see him hesitate. She noticed, on the bridge, that the rain had lightened. It was still falling, but the character of it had changed, less assault and more presence, a fine mist that gathered on surfaces rather than driving into them. The city below them was alive in the way cities are at 2 a.m, not dead, not sleeping, but changed, a different population moving through it on different errands. Talia had spent enough nights in it to know its rhythms. She knew what belonged to this hour and what didn't. The 2 men on the street below them did not belong to this hour. She stopped, put her hand back, found Lucian's arm, pressed. He stopped. She nodded down. He looked. The 2 men were standing at the mouth of an alley 3 blocks away, not walking, just standing, watching. One of them had an earpiece. The other was looking at his phone, which he held at an angle consistent with GPS, not texting, navigating. They were tracking something, or narrowing down a search area. Talia pulled Lucian back from the edge of the roof and moved them away from the railing. They continued across the bridge and down into the adjacent building without speaking. She adjusted the route as she went, running the geography in her mind, calculating alternatives. She brought them down through the building's service exit onto a street 2 blocks north of where she had originally planned. It added time. It added distance. She decided it was worth it. For 20 minutes, they moved through the city's back passages, service roads, delivery corridors, a narrow pedestrian lane between two commercial buildings that was officially listed as a fire access route and actually used by nobody for anything. Lucian kept pace. He didn't complain about the wound. He didn't ask how much farther. He put his head down and he walked with the grim, committed economy of a man who has decided that stopping is not an option and that the only way forward is through. Once, on a stretch of service road between two loading docks, he stumbled. It was slight. He caught himself on the wall immediately and kept moving, but Talia had seen it. She didn't say anything. She slowed her pace by half a step. "I'm fine," he said behind her. "I didn't say you weren't." A pause. "You slowed down." "The road's uneven here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You're a bad liar," he said. "I know," she said. "I never practiced." They reached the warehouse at approximately 2:45 in the morning. It was on the eastern edge of the commercial district, a large two-story structure with the name of a logistics company painted in faded letters on the side that faced the street. The kind of building that existed to be ignored. Functional, anonymous, slightly too worn to attract renovation interest, not worn enough to attract demolition. It looked like dozens of other buildings in this part of the city. Talia stood across the street from it and looked at it for a long moment. Something was bothering her. She couldn't name it immediately. It was the same quality of unease that had made her watch the nervous driver outside the hotel. The same low-frequency signal that her instincts produced when something in the visible picture didn't match the picture she expected. She stood very still, and she let herself feel it without rushing toward a conclusion, because her mother had also taught her that rushing toward conclusions in a situation with incomplete information was one of the fastest ways to make things worse. "What?" Lucian said beside her. "Give me a second." She looked at the building, at the street around it, at the loading dock on the south side, which was dark. At the windows on the upper floor, a couple of them lit, which was odd for a warehouse at this hour, but not impossible if there was overnight staff, except, "How many people normally have access to this building?" she asked. "3," Lucian said, "possibly 4. "Is there a reason any of them would be here tonight?" "No." "Second floor, far left window," Talia said. "Lights on." A pause. "It shouldn't be," he said. "And the loading dock on the south side. The door is open 6 inches. You can see it from here if you look at the bottom, below the dock plate." Another pause. Longer. "Talia." "Yeah." "How long before they know we're standing across the street?" "Depends on whether someone's watching the approach," she said. "If they are, we might already have 30 seconds. They had 20. The south side of the building's loading door swung fully open and 2 men came out of it fast, moving across the street with the direct, purposeful speed of people who are not trying to intercept someone, but to corner them. At the same moment, headlights appeared at the far end of the block, a vehicle moving without urgency, which was more frightening than speed would have been. Lucian grabbed her arm and pulled, and they ran. Not away from the building. There was no way that the vehicle on the block's far end wouldn't cut off. But lateral, along the building's front face, toward the north end, which Talia had already identified during her assessment as having a fire exit door that opened from the outside if you knew how to work the push bar from the exterior, which she did, because she had gone in that way twice before. Once in November when the temperature had dropped to 14 degrees, and she needed somewhere to wait it out until morning. She hit the door first, found the bar by feel in the dark, applied the specific sideways pressure that the warped mechanism needed, and it gave. They were through it before the men from the loading dock reached the building's corner. Inside. Darkness. The smell of machine oil and cardboard and dust. Talia pulled the door shut behind them. A second later, footsteps ran past on the other side of it. She exhaled. Lucian didn't. He was already looking ahead, into the building's interior, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who had made it to somewhere safe. It was the look of a man who has understood that safe was never an option tonight, and that the building he led them to, the one destination he'd been certain about, the one fixed point in a map that had otherwise been dissolving around him for the last several hours, had been compromised before he got there. Which meant Corvin had known he would come here. Which meant Corvin had known the emergency phone was here. Which meant that the knowledge Lucian had believed was his alone had never been his alone. He knew, Lucian said. His voice was completely flat, not angry, stripped of anger, which was worse. He knew about this place. Yes, Talia said. How long has he known? I don't know. How long has he been? He stopped, started again. 12 years. I have known that man for 12 years, and I trusted him with... He stopped again. Talia waited. She had learned, watching her mother in the ER, that sometimes the most useful thing was to stay present and not speak, because what a person needed when a foundational thing had broken was not explanation and not comfort, but just the fact of being witnessed. Lucian stood in the dark with the debris of 12 years of trust scattered around him, and he stood there and held it and did not look away from it. She could see it on his face, not the dramatic anguish that a story might supply, but the real thing, which is quieter and more brutal, the specific look of someone realizing they have been living inside a deception for a very long time without knowing it, and must now go back through every memory they have of that relationship and decide what was real. He took a breath. There are people in this building who are here for me, he said. Yes. The emergency phone. If Corvin knew about it, they'll have it covered. Then we're trapped in here. Unless we move before they do a full sweep, Talia said. I know the building's layout on the ground floor from the fire exit to the central corridor. If there's a way into the maintenance passages... There is, Lucian said. He straightened. The wound pulled at him. She could see it, and he accepted it and moved through it. Southeast corner. Maintenance hatch behind the secondary office partition. Show me, she said. He moved first this time. They went deep into the building, navigating by the thin ambient light that leaked from the upper level. Enough to move by, not enough to be seen by. The central corridor was wide, the kind of space designed for forklifts and pallet jacks, and their footsteps were very soft and very careful on the concrete floor. From above, they could hear movement. Not searching. Already positioned, waiting. Corvin was here. Talia understood it before Lucian said it, from the quality of the stillness above them, the deliberateness of it. Someone up there was not looking for Lucian. They were waiting for him, with the patience of someone who had already calculated the endpoint of everything that came before it. He'll know we came in through the north entrance, Lucian said, very quietly, close to her ear. The door made noise, she said. Yes. Then the clock just started. Yes. Lucian's phone lit in his jacket pocket. Not a call, no sound, just the screen activating, which meant it was a message pushed through with a notification override. He pulled it out, angled it against his chest so the light wouldn't carry. He stared at it for 4 full seconds. Then he turned it so she could read it. It was from an unsaved number. 3 sentences. Short. He told us you'd come here. He said you'd have a girl with you. She's not a concern. She's not a concern. Talia read those words and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes or the temperature of the building. She recognized the particular chill of understanding that you have been seen by someone who has decided you don't matter, and that being decided not to matter by someone like that was not the same as being safe. She looked at Lucian. They know you're not alone, she said. Yes. They think you brought backup. No, he said. They think I brought nothing. He looked at the screen again. That's exactly the problem. From the southeast corner of the building, directly ahead of them, no more than 40 feet, a door opened and light fell into the corridor like something being spilled. And in that light, silhouetted against it, stood a man. Tall, dark coat, not searching, waiting. He had been waiting there, in the corridor, in the dark, for long enough that the light opening behind him was not a discovery. It was a signal. Someone above had seen them move. And Corvin Slate, the man who had stood beside Lucian Veyer for 12 years, the man who had protected him and advised him and eaten at his table and known everything there was to know about him, looked across 40 feet of concrete floor and said, "You're early. I thought the wound would slow you down more than that." Lucian stopped walking. Talia stopped beside him. The light behind Corvin shifted as 2 more shapes moved into the doorway, not in front of him but flanking, framing, filling in the edges of the space so that the corridor ahead was no longer a corridor but an endpoint. Lucian said nothing. "The girl found you," Corvin said. His voice was calm, conversational. The voice of a man who is saying things he has already rehearsed. "I didn't anticipate that. That was sloppy of me." He paused. "Where did you find her? Under an awning somewhere?" Talia kept her face still. The phone at the hotel, Lucian said. His voice was quiet. The driver. You told him to send the location when I was confirmed inside. I told him to send the location when you were confirmed leaving, Corvin said. The timing mattered. I needed you off your home ground. A pause. You always did prefer that hotel. 12 years, Lucian said. 12 years, Corvin agreed. Long time to wait for the right moment. He tilted his head slightly. You were never going to let me build something for myself, Lucian. You took everything else. You took the credit and the authority, and you left me with what you called loyalty, which was just a better word for service. His voice did not change. It stayed conversational, controlled. I decided my loyalty had an expiration date. Talia was not listening to the words exactly. She was watching the angles. She was watching the two men flanking the doorway and the light coming from above and the exact positioning of the shapes in the corridor. She was thinking about the maintenance hatch that Lucian had mentioned, southeast corner, behind the secondary office partition, and whether they had already passed it or whether it was ahead. Ahead, she decided. Maybe 20 feet to the right of where they were standing. Corvin was still speaking. He was the kind of man who had planned what he was going to say and intended to say it, and the distance between him and them and the fact that he was flanked and they were not gave him no reason to rush. The organization's accounts have been moving for 3 months, he said, quietly, into positions that can't be traced back. By the time anyone with the authority to investigate starts looking, there won't be anything left to investigate. Another pause. You trained me to be thorough. I trained you to protect something worth protecting, Lucian said. You trained me to protect you, Corvin said. That's not the same thing. And then, in the corridor, the lights overhead came on. All of them, simultaneously, flooding the entire space with the flat white light of industrial overhead fixtures, and Talia understood in the half-second before it hit them fully that this was the signal, that the conversation had reached its endpoint, that Corvin had said what he came to say, and that what came next was not more conversation. She grabbed Lucian's arm. Right, she said. Now. He didn't ask. He moved. 20 feet to the right, along the wall, the secondary office partition was a temporary structure. Prefab metal panels, the kind that can be disassembled and reconfigured, bolted to the floor at intervals. She found the seam in the second panel from the left, which was where the hinges would have been on the original layout, and she found it by running her hand along the panel's edge rather than by looking, because looking would have cost her half a second she didn't have. Behind her, Corvin said, "Stop them." Footsteps. Fast. Lucian found the maintenance hatch. It was low, designed for access, not for passage, a 3-foot by 3-foot square cut into the building's original concrete partition. He got it open and went through it first, which surprised her, and then she understood why when she heard the footsteps closing behind her and realized he had gone through first so he could hold it for her from the other side. And she went through it fast and he pulled it shut behind her and there was a bolt, rusted, stiff, that she felt him work in the dark beside her until it caught. A half-second later, impact from the other side. The bolt held. Talia pressed her back against the concrete wall in the narrow maintenance passage and felt her heart in her chest and her lungs requesting more air than she was giving them. And she thought about the two men who had been flanking the doorway and how quickly they could find the route around, and how much time the bolt was actually going to buy them, and whether it was enough. Beside her, in the absolute dark of the passage, Lucian was breathing hard, not controlled. For the first time since she had found him in the alley, the control had cracked just slightly, and what was underneath was not the calm of a man who had managed worse. It was something more human, something that sounded like a person who had spent the last 4 hours losing every fixed point he had ever depended on, and was now standing in the dark, with a girl he dismissed as worthless, and a rusted bolt between himself and the man he had trusted most. The bolt would not hold forever. Talia knew this, the way she knew most practical things. Not from theory, but from the specific, unglamorous experience of having depended on broken infrastructure to keep her safe, and having learned through repeated and sometimes painful lessons exactly how much weight a rusted mechanism could bear before it stopped doing its job. The impact from the other side had come twice more since they'd pressed into the maintenance passage. Each time the bolt shuddered in its housing. The second impact had produced a sound, a thin metallic complaint, that told her the threading in the housing was already compromised. One more hit with real force, and the bolt would give, and what was on the other side of that door would come through it. "Move," she said. Lucian was already moving. The maintenance passage ran parallel to the warehouse's central corridor. She could feel the geometry of it by the way sound traveled, the footsteps above them transferring through the concrete structure as vibration she felt in her back and her heels. The passage was narrow enough that she had to turn slightly sideways in places, and dark in a way that was total and absolute. The kind of dark that removes the option of sight and forces everything else into sharper definition: sound, touch, the particular temperature variations that told her when she was near a vent or an opening. She kept one hand on the left wall and moved fast. Lucian was close behind her. She could hear him. The slight irregularity in his breathing was more pronounced now. The pain no longer something he was managing at a distance, but something that had gotten closer, insistent, demanding acknowledgement he wasn't going to give it. "How far does this passage go?" he asked, low, right behind her ear. "I don't know exactly," she said. "I've been in the building twice, both times from the north fire entrance. I've never been in this section." A pause. "So you're navigating blind?" "We're both navigating blind," she said. "The difference is I'm used to it." He said nothing to that. Behind them, distant, muffled by concrete and steel, a sound that was not an impact. It was a door, different door, a route around. Someone with knowledge of the building's layout, finding a faster path to the same destination. Corvin knew this building as well as Lucian did. Maybe better. 12 years of access produced a specific kind of familiarity. Talia moved faster. Her outstretched hand found empty space where the wall should have been, and she stopped, reached, found the edge. A junction. The passage branched. She crouched and pressed her palm to the floor of each branch, feeling for the direction of airflow, for the subtle differential in temperature that moving air creates. The left branch was still and cold. The right branch had something. Not much, but something, the faintest suggestion of circulation. Moving air meant an opening somewhere. She went right, 40 feet, 50. The passage widened slightly. Then her hand hit a surface that was not concrete, metal, different resonance when she tapped it carefully. A panel. She worked her fingers around its edges and found the catch in the lower right corner. A simple spring mechanism, the kind that maintenance workers use 100 times a day, and that therefore gets simplified until almost anything can operate it. She pressed, and it gave. Cold air hit her face from the other side, and with it, the unmistakable quality of outdoor sound, rain against surfaces, the distant movement of the city, the particular acoustic character of a large open space. She pushed the panel fully open, and they came through it into a loading area at the rear of the warehouse, covered by a roof overhang, but open on 3 sides, stacked with empty pallets and broken-down cardboard that nobody had moved in a long time. She pulled the panel shut behind them. For 15 seconds, she stood absolutely still and listened. No immediate pursuit. Not yet. But they had come out of the building, which solved the problem of the bolt and created the problem of open ground. And Lucian was injured and bleeding, and the adrenaline that had been carrying him through the last 40 minutes of movement was the kind of resource that had a very hard ceiling. She looked at him in the gray pre-dawn light that came from the eastern sky above the loading yard. What she saw was not good. The dressing she had applied in the maintenance room was holding, but his face had a quality she recognized, a particular pallor, a slight grayness around the mouth that wasn't shadow, that was the color of a body that has been managing blood loss and pain through willpower for too long and is beginning to send signals that willpower alone is no longer an adequate response. "Sit down," she said. "No." "You're going to sit down in the next 30 seconds voluntarily or involuntarily," she said. "I'd like it to be voluntarily because we'll lose less time." He sat down. Not on the ground. He found the edge of a pallet stack and lowered himself onto it with the controlled deliberateness of someone who is choosing to sit rather than being forced to, which was a distinction she understood mattered to him and that she did not challenge. She crouched in front of him and checked the dressing by feel and by what the dim light would show her. Bled through at one corner. Not catastrophically, but significantly. The movement through the maintenance passage had worked it loose. "I need to redo this," she said. "We don't have time." "We have 3 minutes before it gets worse and costs us 10, she said. "Give me 3 minutes. He gave her 3 minutes. She worked. Her hands were cold. They had been cold for hours. But cold hands were better than shaking hands, and hers were not shaking. She had her mother's voice in her ear the whole time, a running internal commentary that Mara Rook had always narrated during procedure, not for the patient's benefit but for her own, a way of keeping the mind organized when the situation pushed toward chaos. Assess first. Always assess before you do anything. What is the actual situation, not what you fear it is? Work from what you can see, not from what you're afraid you'll see. The wound was worse than 3 hours ago. Not dangerously worse, but the borderline between manageable and not was closer than it had been. He needed a hospital. He needed sutures and a clean environment and antibiotics. He needed everything that the next several hours were going to make impossible to provide. She told him this. "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it to scare you. I'm saying it so you factor it into whatever plan you're making. I'm aware of my own condition. Are you?" A pause. "Yes," he said, with slightly less certainty than the word required. She secured the dressing, stood up, looked at the loading yard, the open sections, the sections covered by the overhang, the exit points. A chain-link gate at the yard's west end stood open, which was either good luck or a setup, and she spent 30 seconds deciding which before concluding that the probability of it being a setup required someone to have anticipated their exit route through the maintenance passage, which would require knowledge of the passage itself, which Corvin may have had, but which would have required him to move faster than she calculated he'd moved. She went with good luck, knowing it might not be. "There's a gate," she said. "West end. From there we can reach the elevated train platform, the old Maris line, decommissioned. The access ladder is on the north face of the support pillar on Crane Street. From the platform we can see 3 blocks in every direction." "Why the platform?" he asked. "Because it's the only high ground in this section," she said, "and because nobody goes there, and because right now what you need is a place to stop where I can actually think." He stood from the pallet, tested his weight, accepted the result of that test without comment. "All right," he said. They crossed the loading yard. The gate was open and nothing came through it after them, and Talia marked that in her running assessment of the situation as information rather than relief, because relief was a feeling that required safety, and safety was not yet a state they were in. Crane Street was 4 blocks east. They covered it in 7 minutes, staying against the building faces, using the awnings and the alley mouths for cover. Twice Talia stopped them, once for a vehicle that turned out to be an ordinary delivery truck, once for 2 figures on the opposite sidewalk who turned out, after 30 seconds of watching, to be 2 people heading home from somewhere with the specific gait of the very tired and slightly drunk, connected to nothing. The elevated platform's access ladder was where she had said it was. Old steel, city-painted over decades, until the paint was its own structural layer. She went up first, checked the platform, came back to the top of the ladder, and nodded. He came up. She watched him manage the ladder with the arm that didn't pull the wound and pretended not to be watching, and he pretended not to notice that she was watching, and between these 2 pretenses they got him onto the platform without either of them having to acknowledge how difficult it had actually been. The platform was a long, narrow, concrete shelf 30 feet above street level, the rails long since stripped for metal, the overhead structure open to the sky. From up here, the city spread in 3 directions: lights and wet rooftops, and the occasional moving headlights of vehicles that had no idea what was happening in the streets beneath them. Talia sat on the platform edge with her legs hanging over, not because it was comfortable, because it gave her the widest possible view. Lucian sat behind her, back against one of the old platform supports, and for the first time since the alley, he was genuinely still. Not strategically still. Still the way a person is still when the adrenaline has reached its limit and the body is presenting its account. She gave him 4 minutes before she spoke. "The phone," she said. "The message. The one that said she's not a concern." "What about it?" "It came from an unsaved number. But the notification override, that's not something a random contact can do. You have to whitelist that specifically." A pause. "Yes," he said. "So the person who sent that message is someone whose messages you've set to override your silent settings." Longer pause. "Yes. Which means it's someone inside your actual organization, not Corvin's crew, someone who sits above that." The silence that followed this was different from the previous silences. It had a different density. Talia kept her eyes on the street below and let it sit there. How many people have whitelist access on your phone? She asked. 4, Lucian said, including Corvin. 3 others. Yes. Do you trust all 3 of them the same way you trusted Corvin? The pause before his answer was the answer. I trusted Corvin more than any of them, he said finally, but I trusted the others with different things. He stopped, started again. The message could have come from someone who compromised one of their devices rather than, could have, Talia said, or it came from the source. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the city. His face in the gray pre-dawn light was the face of a man who has been taking inventory and does not like the sum. You're telling me, he said slowly, that this goes deeper than Corvin. I'm telling you what the message implies, Talia said. You're the one who knows these people. He was quiet for a long time. Below them, on the street, a car moved through an intersection and was gone. The rain had reduced itself to almost nothing, a mist, the tail end of the storm, the part that doesn't know yet that the main event is over. There's a name, he said at last, Rael Doss. He runs the financial operations, legitimate and otherwise. He's been with the organization since before I took over. He was my predecessor's man, then mine. A pause. He and Corvin have always had a working relationship. I assumed it was professional. And if it was more than that, then the accounts that Corvin mentioned moving, Rael would have had to facilitate that. The access required isn't something Corvin had on his own. Talia thought about this. The message said she's not a concern. That's not how Corvin talks about people. In the corridor, he called me the girl. Whoever sent that message doesn't know you well enough to know what you look like under pressure. They were reassuring someone. Reassuring who? Whoever was worried that you'd have backup with you. She paused. Corvin wasn't worried about backup. He wasn't surprised that it was just the 2 of us, which means the message wasn't sent to Corvin. The moment this landed, she could see it in his face. The recalculation, the inventory updating in real time. It was sent to the buyer, Lucian said. What buyer? If Rael has been moving the accounts, if this goes back further than tonight, then there's someone at the end of the chain, someone who is buying what Corvin and Rael are selling. He pressed the back of his head against the support pillar. His jaw was tight. The organization, the legitimate businesses, the infrastructure, all of it. He stopped. Someone has been purchasing control of everything I built and using the people I trusted to do it, and He stopped again. The word he didn't say sat in the air between them. I didn't see it. Talia let the silence last as long as it needed to. Then she said, Your phone. Can you access the financial accounts from it? No, that requires Rael's authentication in addition to mine. Can you contact anyone? Someone not on the whitelist. Someone who wouldn't be on Corvin's radar. He thought. She could see him thinking, going through a list, running names against the question of how connected each one was to the people who had just tried to end him. There's a woman, he said, Pella Voss. She runs security compliance for the legitimate logistics arm. The warehouse we just left officially belongs to her division. She's not connected to any of the organization's other operations. I deliberately kept her separate. A pause. She'd be at her home right now. She doesn't know anything about tonight. Can you reach her without using your own number? He looked at the phone. If I disable location services and spoof the outgoing identifier, Rail doesn't have access to this device directly. But if he has access to the carrier account, how fast can he move on it? Minutes, if he's watching. Then you have to decide, Talia said, whether the risk of contact is worth what you might get from it. He decided in approximately 4 seconds, which told her something about how much he trusted Pelavos relative to every other name on his mental list. He made the call. It rang 4 times. Talia watched the street below. Nothing moving that shouldn't be moving. A woman's voice answered, rough with sleep and sharpened immediately by the sound of his voice. Not the number, which she wouldn't have recognized, but his voice, which she did. Lucian. Flat. Alert. Don't react, he said. Don't say my name again after this. I need you to listen. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second. Listening. Rail Doss. I need you to tell me the last 3 transactions you can see from the compliance side of the logistics accounts. Not the full picture. Just the 3 most recent movements. A silence. Long he waited. When Pella's voice came back, it had changed in a way that was very small and very significant. The alertness was still there, but underneath it was something new, something cautious and pulled back. The voice of someone who has looked at a piece of information and understood that it is larger than the space she expected to find it in. She gave him 3 figures. He listened. He didn't react while she was speaking, but Talia, watching his face, saw what happened to it when the 3rd figure landed. It was brief, controlled, but it was the look of a man who has just understood the actual scale of something he had been measuring wrong. "Thank you," he said. "Don't call this number back. Don't contact Rael. Go somewhere that isn't your apartment and don't use your work phone." He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment that was longer than a moment, and Talia waited. 3 transfers, he said, in the last 72 hours. Not accounts moving, not repositioning within the organization. He stopped. Full disbursements. To external entities. Combined total removes approximately 60% of the liquid capital from the legitimate operations. 60%, Talia said, in 72 hours. "That's not repositioning," she said. "No," he said, "that's a closing of accounts." Talia thought about what that meant. What it meant if you were someone who had built a criminal organization and embedded it inside a structure of legitimate businesses and spent years making the 2 things sufficiently intertwined that one could not be pulled without bringing the other. If someone wanted to collapse that entire structure, they wouldn't do it with violence. Violence drew attention, investigation, official response. They would do it with money. They would bleed it out slowly and then quickly and then completely, and by the time the violence happened, the money would already be gone. The violence tonight wasn't the main event. The violence tonight was the distraction. The attack, she said. The ambush. Corvin bringing people in. All of it tonight. A delay, Lucian said. Keep me occupied. Keep me running. Keep me away from communications and away from anyone who could tell me what was happening to the accounts in real time. His voice was very quiet. By morning, by the time anyone who might have stopped this came looking, there would be nothing left to find. Talia absorbed this. Then something else occurred to her. "The negotiation," she said. "You said Corvin was negotiating a truce with a rival organization." "Yes, for 6 weeks." "And during those 6 weeks, how much access did those negotiations give the other organization to your operational information?" The silence this time was the worst kind, the kind that confirms what was being asked rather than deflecting it. "Enough," Lucian said. "Who is the rival organization?" "They go by the name Keth," he said, "based out of the northern ports. They've been trying to expand into the commercial district for 3 years. And if Keth is the buyer, if the money that left your accounts in the last 72 hours went to an entity connected to Keth, then the truce negotiation was never a truce negotiation. It was a due diligence process," Lucian said. "They were assessing what they were purchasing." He stood up. The movement was abrupt enough that she reached toward him automatically, not touching, just close, in case. He didn't need it. He found his footing and stood with the particular steadiness of a man who has gone past the point where pain registers as a deterrent and arrived somewhere beyond it, a place where the emotional weight of what he's understood has temporarily overridden the physical. "I have to get to Rael," he said. "Rael is part of this. I know he's part of this." His voice was controlled, but the control was doing more work than it had been an hour ago. "That's why I have to get to him, before he finishes what he started, before those accounts are empty, and whatever trace there is disappears." He looked down at the street. "If I can reach Rael and I can get a confession, a real one, documented, with the account trails, I have something. I have something I can use." "Use how?" she asked. "Against Keth. Against whoever at the top of that organization made this deal." He paused. "And against Corvin." "Lucian," she kept her voice level, "you're injured, you have no functional security, your financial operation has been half liquidated, and the man who designed this entire situation has been planning it for God knows how long. Reaching Rael means walking into... I know what it means." "Let me finish," she said. He stopped. She looked at him. "Reaching Rael means walking into a situation where you have no leverage except the element of surprise, and surprise only works once. If Rael has already moved the last 40%, he hasn't," Lucian said. "How do you know?" "Because Pella's transactions were completed 3 hours ago, and the accounts she accessed from the compliance side still show the remaining 40% as pending review." He paused. Rail set a review flag, compliance protocol. He couldn't remove it without Pella's authorization, which he doesn't have. A brief grim something crossed his face that was not quite satisfaction. He didn't anticipate that Pella would have visibility on those particular accounts. Talia thought about this carefully. So the 40% is frozen until he can clear the flag. Yes. And he doesn't know that Pella just told you this. No. And he doesn't know where you are. As of the last 10 minutes, probably not. That window won't stay open. She stood up from the platform edge, looked at him fully. What do you need from me? She asked. He looked back at her. The question seemed to take him somewhere unexpected, not because it was complex, but because of the particular directness of it, the complete absence of agenda in it. He had spent the last several hours being helped by someone who had no obligation to help him, and the question of what he needed had not, in his experience, typically been asked by people who genuinely intended to provide it. I need to get to the DOS building without going through any of the routes Corvin's crew would be watching, he said. The DOS financial offices are in the Merritt Tower, Commercial District, North Side, 12 blocks from here. I know the Merritt Tower, she said. I know a route. Of course you do, he said. There was something in the way he said it, not sarcasm. The word had no bite. It was something closer to a man arriving, after a long journey, at a simple truth. The city he had believed he controlled had an entire dimension he had never bothered to look at, and the person standing next to him had been living in that dimension for the better part of a year. There's something else, he said. She waited. If this goes wrong, if we get inside that building and Rael has already completed the transfers and there's nothing left to document, I have nothing, no leverage, no evidence, no way to stop what's already been set in motion. He paused. I need you to understand that before we go. I understand it, she said. And you're still... I'm still, she said. Why? He asked. And it was the same question from the maintenance room, asked again, not because he hadn't heard the answer the first time, but because the situation had changed and he wanted to know if the answer had changed with it. It hadn't. Because the men looking for you tonight are connected to the same people who make this city worse for everyone who lives in the parts of it you've never had to look at, she said. And because you're the only one here who can do something about it if we get this right. A pause. That's a very large amount of trust, he said, for a man who threw you into the rain 4 hours ago. I'm not trusting the man who threw me into the rain, she said. I'm trusting the man who's been listening to me since the alley. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to name. They went down the ladder. The route to the Merritt Tower took them through the service district behind the commercial plaza, across 2 blocks of covered pedestrian passage that connected the old municipal market to the parking structure on Aldine Street, and through the parking structure's lower level, which at 4 in the morning held 14 vehicles and 0 people and smelled of oil and concrete sealer and the specific plastic warmth of enclosed automotive space. They were 7 minutes from the Merritt Tower when Lucian's phone lit. He checked it and went absolutely still. The kind of still he had been in the maintenance room when the footsteps were outside the door. Talia stopped walking. What? She said. He turned the phone. The message was from Corvin. Direct this time. Not the unsaved number. Corvin's actual contact, the one that would have been in Lucian's phone for 12 years. It was short. You should know. The girl's mother. Mara Rook, Greyhaven General, 11 years. She wasn't just a nurse. She was reporting to my predecessor on hospital cases connected to organization activity. We paid her debts when she cooperated. When she stopped cooperating, the debts came back. I thought you should know who's been helping you tonight. Talia read it over his shoulder. She read it twice. She stood in the parking structure and she read the words about her mother, and she felt the concrete floor under her feet and the cold air against her face and the weight of the backpack on her shoulders, and she did not move. Lucian lowered the phone. He didn't say anything. He waited the way she had waited for him on the platform. Present, not speaking, letting the weight of the information exist in the space between them without rushing to manage it. Talia looked at the far wall of the parking structure, at the yellow line painted on the concrete, at the flickering fluorescent above the exit sign. It's a tactic, she said. Probably, Lucian said, carefully. He sent it now because he wants me to stop. He wants me to walk away from this. Yes. Which means he's more concerned about what we're doing than he wants to appear. Probably, she breathed. The information about her mother sat in her chest like something very heavy that had been placed there without her consent and that she did not yet know what to do with. She was aware of it with total clarity. She was also aware that the parking structure was 4 levels of concrete between them and the open street, and that they were 7 minutes from the Moret Tower, and that the compliance flag on the remaining 40% of Lucian's accounts would not stay unresolved indefinitely. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is it something that could be true?" Lucian's pause was considered. Corvin's predecessor did run informants in medical facilities. It was an intelligence operation, standard for organizations that move through the city the way ours did. Hospital staff sometimes interacted with people connected to the organization. Whether your mother... He stopped. "I don't know. I can't verify it from here. I can't verify it tonight." "But it's possible." "It's possible," he said. Talia was quiet for 10 seconds. She counted them. It was something her mother had taught her. When something hits you hard, don't respond in the first 10 seconds. Just breathe through them. Then decide. She said. "All right, what?" "All right, I'll think about what that means later. Right now, we're 7 minutes from the building and we're wasting time." She started walking. Lucian didn't move immediately. "Talia," he said. She turned. He looked at her with an expression that she couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't pity. She would have recognized pity, and she would have responded to it in a specific way. It was something more like the look of a man who has, in one night, been saved by the daughter of a woman his world may have destroyed, and who is confronting what that means with the particular rawness of someone who cannot pretend he hasn't understood it. "If what Corvin said is true," he said, "then the organization I ran contributed to what happened to your mother, to what happened to you." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "It might have." "And you're still—" "I'm still," she said. "Because if I stop now, whoever did it wins. And whatever my mother did or didn't do, she spent 11 years keeping people alive." She paused. "So did I, tonight. I'm not going to stop that for a message Corvin Slate sent to make me walk away." She turned and walked toward the exit. After 2 seconds, she heard him follow. The Moret Tower's service entrance was on the north face, accessible through a maintenance corridor that ran beneath the adjacent parking structure and connected to the building's utility infrastructure. Talia had been through it once, in January, following a steam pipe's warmth through the underground passages that connected half the commercial district's buildings in a network that the building's occupants never thought about and that she had learned to navigate by necessity. The maintenance door opened with a key card, but the secondary access, a smaller panel set into the wall 6 feet to the left of the main door, designed for utility workers and marked with a faded orange service logo, had a mechanical override that required a specific pressure sequence on its 4 contact points, which she knew because she had watched a utility worker use it twice and had the kind of memory for observed physical sequences that her mother had always called her most useful and most underappreciated quality. The panel opened. Lucian looked at it, then at her. "Remind me," he said, "to think very carefully in the future about what I consider worthless." "You already told me that on the train platform," she said. "I'm reminding myself," he said. They went in. The building's lower utility level was warm, warmer than anything had been all night, and the warmth hit Talia in a way she hadn't anticipated, a full-body response that informed her, in the way that physical comfort sometimes does after a long, cold stretch, exactly how cold she had been for the last several hours. Her hands were stiff, her feet were wet inside her shoes. Her coat had stopped being a real coat somewhere around the second block and had settled into being approximately the idea of a coat. She pushed through it. The service elevator was at the end of the utility corridor. Lucian hit the button for the 14th floor. Rael Doss's offices occupied the full floor, accessed by 2 elevators, but only the service elevator reached the floor's back entrance, which was connected to the server room in the facilities office rather than the reception area. The elevator ascended slowly. Neither of them spoke. Talia watched the floor indicator. 8, 9, 10. Lucian held the phone in both hands, looking at it, not at Corvin's message, but at his own contacts list, running through something in his mind. "The evidence I need," he said, without looking up. "The account trails. If Rael has the full transfer documentation on his system, if I can get it out of there before he wipes it. What format?" "Digital." His system runs a proprietary financial architecture, but it exports to standard formats. I need 20 minutes at his terminal. Do you know his access credentials? Some of them. Enough to get past the first level. A pause. The second level requires a biometric. She thought about what that meant. Rael's biometric. Yes. Which means you need Rael. Yes. In a cooperative state. He won't be cooperative. Then you need leverage before you walk in that door, she said. The elevator reached 14. The doors opened, and the corridor outside was not empty. Rael Doss was a compact man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the careful grooming of someone who understood that appearance was its own form of authority. I was standing in the corridor outside the server room with a phone pressed to his ear and an expression that, when the elevator doors opened and he saw what was inside them, underwent a very fast and very complete transformation, from the controlled attention of a man conducting late-night business to something that was not quite fear and not quite surprise, but a combination of both that his face was not practiced enough to conceal. The phone dropped slightly from his ear. Lucian stepped out of the elevator. "Rael," he said. Quiet. Steady. The specific voice of a man who has nothing left to lose and has therefore stopped calculating. Rael said nothing. His eyes moved to Talia, assessed her in 1 second, dismissed her in the next, which was a mistake that she recognized and noted. Then Rael's eyes moved back to Lucian, and in them was the look of a man whose exit strategy has just walked off the edge of the map, and who is now determining in real time what comes next. He made a decision. He reached for the door behind him, the server room door, the one that required the key card he had in his left hand, and Lucian crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and put his hand flat against the door before it could close, and looked at Rael Doss across 6 inches of air with the eyes of a man who has been ambushed, betrayed, shot at, chased through the dark machinery of a city he thought he owned, and who has arrived, finally, at the person who made the numbers work. "Don't," Lucian said. It was a single word. It was the kind of word that arrives with its own weather. Rael Doss looked at the hand on the door, at the face above it, at the particular quality of stillness in Lucian Weyer, which was not the stillness of restraint, but the stillness of a man who has already decided and is simply waiting for the other person to understand. Slowly, Rael's hand came away from the key card. The door did not close, and in the server room behind it, the screens of Rael Doss's financial terminals glowed with the blue-white light of accounts that had not yet been fully emptied, transfers that had not yet been completed, and the 40% that a compliance flag had held in place for the last 3 hours sat exactly where it had sat when Pellavos saw it, frozen, accessible, and still provable. Lucian looked at it. Then he looked at Rael. "You're going to sit down," he said, "and you're going to show me everything." Rael Doss sat down. And the night, which had begun with a girl pushed into the rain and a man who didn't bother to look at her, arrived at its true center, a room full of evidence that could end everything, and 2 people who had survived the dark long enough to reach it, and a man between them who had underestimated both. Rael Doss had the hands of an accountant. That was the first thing Talia noticed when he sat down at the terminal, not the hands of someone who had ever held a weapon or broken a door or run from anything. Soft palms, neat nails. The hands of a man who had always done his violence at a distance, through numbers, through the quiet redirect of money from one column to another, through the specific brutality of making things disappear on paper before they disappeared in reality. He sat in the chair, and he looked at the screen, and he did not look at Lucian. "Both hands on the desk," Lucian said. Rael placed both hands flat on the desk surface. His left hand had a slight tremor. He was managing it, but not quite successfully. "The transfers," Lucian said. "All of them. Going back 6 weeks. If I pull the full record," Rael started. "I know what it does," Lucian said. "It timestamps the access. I know that. Do it anyway." Rael's fingers moved to the keyboard. Talia positioned herself near the door, not blocking it, but close enough to it that she would know immediately if anything moved in the corridor outside. She kept her peripheral vision on Rael and her primary attention on the gap under the door, on the sounds of the building around them, on the quality of the silence that pressed in from the floors below. The server room was cold. Buildings like this kept their server infrastructure cold. The machines ran hot, and the cooling systems compensated with aggressive chill. Talia had been cold for hours, and this was a different cold, dry and artificial, the cold of controlled environment rather than weather. It felt almost clinical. On the terminal screen, data began to populate. Lucian leaned over Rael's shoulder and read. Talia watched him read. She watched his face do the thing it had done on the platform when the third figure from Pella landed. The brief, controlled response of a man registering something larger than he had prepared for. And then the deliberate reassertion of control over his own expression, because the man he was standing over could not be allowed to see the full impact of what the screen was showing. 6 weeks, Lucian said. Not 3 months. 6 weeks, Rael said. He had found, now that the decision to cooperate had been made for him by the pressure in the room, a kind of flat compliance. Not remorse, not exactly, but the particular economy of a man who has calculated that cooperation is now the lowest risk available option. The initial contact was 3 months ago. The actual movement of funds began 6 weeks ago. Who initiated contact, Keth or you? A pause. Corvin initiated it, Rael said. I was brought in 4 weeks after the initial conversation. Corvin went to Keth. Yes. And offered them what? Rael's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Access. Operational infrastructure. Routes, contacts. Established relationships with supply networks in the commercial district. He paused. And you? Corvin offered them. The removal of the current leadership is part of the acquisition package. The silence in the room had weight. Talia looked at Lucian's face. He was looking at the screen. Whatever was happening behind his eyes at that moment, the full arrival of what it meant that a man he had trusted for 12 years had offered his life as a transaction cost. He was holding it somewhere interior. He had gotten very good tonight at holding things in interior spaces and continuing to function. The compliance flag, Lucian said. The remaining 40%, Pellavos's review flag. I couldn't clear it without her authorization, Rael said. I underestimated her access to those accounts. By the time I realized the flag was in place, I couldn't reach her directly without raising... He stopped. Without raising questions. Because she's clean, Lucian said. Yes. You didn't compromise her. She wasn't approachable, Rael said. The word came out with a slight coloring. Not quite admiration, but something adjacent to irritation. The specific frustration of a man who had found one piece that wouldn't fit his design. She keeps her compliance work at arm's length from the organizational side. Very deliberate. I couldn't find an angle. How long before the flag auto-clears? Lucian asked. Without manual authorization? Rael checked something on the screen. 6 hours. Standard compliance protocol. Lucian looked at the time display on the terminal. 4:17 in the morning. 6 hours from now was 10:17. The city would be fully awake by then. The business day would have started. People who had no idea what had happened overnight would be sitting at desks and drinking coffee, and the money that remained would evaporate through legitimate-looking mechanisms into accounts that would subsequently not exist. Export everything, Lucian said. The full transfer history. Every account, every recipient, every timestamp. All of it. Rael's hands moved on the keyboard. To what? He said. Lucian reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a small USB drive. Flat, black, the kind that looks like nothing, and set it on the desk beside the keyboard. Rael looked at it. That's... If this data goes to... Do it, Lucian said. Rael did it. The export progress bar appeared on the screen. Talia watched it and watched the door simultaneously. The building was quiet in the way of buildings at 4 in the morning. Not dead quiet, because buildings of this size never fully go to sleep. Their systems run continuously, their infrastructure hums and cycles and maintains itself, but quiet in the way of inhabited space between its inhabitants' hours. She was listening for the elevator. 17%, 32%. She was listening for footsteps in the stairwell. The stairwell access was at the far end of the corridor. She had noted it when the elevator opened. Solid door, heavy, the kind that closed slowly on its pneumatic arm and would produce a specific sound at its catch. 48%. Corvin knows we're in the building, she said. Lucian looked at her. He sent the message about my mother when we were in the parking structure, she said. He was trying to stop us, which means he knew roughly where we were, which means he had someone watching the parking structure or the approaches to this building. She paused. He knows where we ended up. How long? Lucian said. We've been in here 11 minutes. If he had a car positioned, 8 minutes to get here. Less if he moved when he sent the message. 61%. Lucian straightened, looked at the door, looked at the progress bar. Is there a secondary exit from this floor? He asked Rael. Fire exit at the east end, Rael said. Stairs down to the basement. The basement has access to the parking structure through a utility corridor. Is it alarmed? Yes. Sensor on the door. Bypassed how? Rael's pause was the pause of a man deciding whether the information he's being asked for will make his situation better or worse. He correctly identified that it would make his situation no worse than it already was. Panel on the left side of the stairwell entrance. 6-digit code. 549132. 77%. Talia moved away from the main door and went to the corridor, looked both ways. Empty. The elevator indicator above the doors showed the car still at lobby level. The stairwell door at the far east end of the corridor was closed. She went back. Nothing yet, she said. 89%. The three of them watched the bar. It was the kind of watching that happens when there is nothing to do but wait for a mechanism to complete itself, and the cost of interrupting it is total, so the waiting has a quality of suspension, held breath, held judgment, the specific tension of a situation that has been set in motion and cannot now be recalled. 94%. The stairwell door at the end of the corridor opened. Talia heard the catch, the specific sound she had been waiting for. The soft impact of heavy door on frame, transmitted through the building's walls as a vibration she felt as much as heard. It's done, she said. Take the drive. Lucian pulled the drive from the port as the progress hit 100%. Pocketed it. He looked at Rael. Rael looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just handed over the evidence of his own crimes and is now in the position of waiting to discover what that cost him. Stay in the chair, Lucian said. And if Corvin comes through that door, Rael said, what do I tell? Whatever keeps you breathing, Lucian said. That's not my problem. He came away from the terminal. Talia was already moving. The main door of the server room was not the door she went for. She went for the secondary access at the room's interior wall, a narrower door, unmarked, that she had identified when they came in as a second point of entry, and that connected, she estimated from the building's geometry, to the facilities corridor behind the server room. She opened it and looked. Correct. A narrow service corridor, lit by a single strip of emergency lighting, running parallel to the main corridor outside. Lucian came through behind her. She pulled the door shut. In the main corridor outside the server room, she heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Not searching. Moving with purpose, with direction, with the specific velocity of people who know where they're going. Corvin's voice, muffled through the wall. Server room. Then quieter, something she couldn't make out. Then Rael's voice, his flat, compliant voice, saying something she also couldn't make out, but the tone of it was the tone of a man describing what had just happened in the room, in response to a direct question, without embellishment. She and Lucian moved through the service corridor fast. The corridor connected to a cross passage that ran behind the elevator shaft, and the cross passage opened onto the east stairwell lobby, a small, bare space with the alarm panel on the left wall, exactly where Rael had said it would be. Lucian hit the code. 549132. The indicator light shifted from red to green without sound. Talia pushed the fire exit door open. No alarm. They went into the stairwell and the door closed behind them, and for a moment they were in the bare concrete and metal of the building's emergency infrastructure, the kind of space that exists to save lives in extremity and that therefore looks nothing like the rest of the building. No finish, no design, just function, just structure, just the basic bones of the thing. Lucian's hand found the railing. He went down. Talia went behind him, and she watched him on the stairs with the part of her attention that was always running the medical calculation. The gait, the compensation, the point at which the body's compensatory mechanisms start producing their own problems. He was managing. I was managing the way a person manages when they have decided to manage regardless of cost, and she had run the numbers enough times tonight to know that the bill for this level of management would arrive, and that when it arrived, it would be significant. They couldn't think about that now. Third floor, second, first, basement. The utility corridor from the basement to the parking structure was exactly what Rael had described. A low-ceilinged passage, concrete block walls, service pipes running overhead, lit by fluorescent tubes that had the slightly sick yellow quality of tubes that needed replacing. It smelled of concrete sealer and something mechanical, a faint petroleum note that lived permanently in the infrastructure of buildings this size. Talia checked the parking structure entrance before they went through it. Empty. Same vehicles she had counted before. No new additions, no visible people. She went through and Lucian followed, and they moved through the parking level in the direction of the street exit, not the pedestrian exit, which opened onto the main front approach where anyone watching the building would be watching, but the vehicle exit on the building's south side, which opened onto the service lane running behind the adjacent property. She stopped them 10 feet from the vehicle exit. She could see the bottom section of the exit ramp from where she stood, and at the bottom of the ramp, just inside the property line, a car was parked sideways across the exit in a manner that was not accidental. Not a vehicle that had stalled or been abandoned. A vehicle that was positioned. 2 men leaning against it, one of them looking up at the Merit Tower, one of them looking at his phone. Talia pulled back. "South exit is covered," she said. "How many?" "2 visible. There may be more." Lucian leaned against the parking structure wall and closed his eyes for 3 seconds. She recognized this. Not rest, not surrender, but the specific brief shutdown of a mind that is pulling its remaining resources into a single prioritized calculation. He opened his eyes. "There's a loading dock on the east side of this structure," he said. "It connects to the building next door, a food service supplier. The dock was shared when this block was originally built, before the properties were separated. The connecting door was locked when they split the properties, but the frame is original, and the lock hardware was never properly integrated into either security system." Talia looked at him. "You know that because," she said. "Because I own the building next door," he said, "under a holding company. I know the gap in the security because my own security team flagged it 18 months ago, and He paused. "I never got around to addressing it. For a different kind of night, she might have said something about the specific irony of a gap in his own security saving him from his own security. She didn't say it. "Show me," she said. The loading dock was at the parking structure's northeast corner, accessed through a fire door that required a key card. A key card Lucian did not have. He stood in front of the card reader, and she watched him think. "Do you have anything metal?" he said. "Flat, thin." She went through her jacket pocket and found, at the bottom, beneath the folded emergency mylar, and the 2 remaining antiseptic wipes and the granola bar she had forgotten about, a thin metal ruler, 6 inches, the kind that had once been part of a basic geometry set, and that she carried because flat metal objects had approximately 40 practical applications when you were living rough, and she had found this one on a sidewalk and kept it. She handed it to him. He looked at it briefly, then at the card reader housing. "The reader is a standard magnetic swipe," he said, "but the actuator for the lock mechanism is separate. It's mounted in the door frame. If the housing on the reader has a factory access panel." He was already working the edge of the ruler into the seam on the reader's bottom panel. It took him 90 seconds. The panel came open. Inside was a small circuit board, and mounted beside it, a manual test bypass, a small copper contact designed for maintenance access, that, when shorted with a thin flat piece of metal, completed the circuit that the card reader was supposed to complete. The door clicked. He pushed it open. She took the ruler back. "You learn things," she said. "I learn things," he agreed, and there was something in his voice, not quite warmth, but the precursor to warmth, the place where it lives before it's been fully earned. And she didn't comment on it, and he didn't expand on it, and they went through the door. The connecting dock was exactly as he had described. An original shared space, now divided by a partition wall that ran down the center and that had, at its far end, a door with a lock set that predated both properties' current security systems by approximately 20 years. Old brass mechanism, worn keyhole, the kind of lock that a specific type of thin metal implement could address if the person holding it had the patience and the angle. Talia addressed it in 4 minutes. The door opened into the food service supplier's receiving area. A large cold space, industrial shelving, the smell of commercial refrigeration and cardboard, and the specific sterility of food-adjacent industry. Dark except for the emergency lighting. No staff at this hour. They moved through it to the front of the building, and from there to the street entrance, which was a simple thumb turn from the inside, and from there to the street. The service lane behind the Moret Tower was a block behind them now. The men at the south exit were a block behind them and looking the wrong direction. Talia stopped on the sidewalk and looked both ways along the street, which was a street she knew, Callum Avenue, 1 block north of the commercial district's main artery, with a city bus stop 40 feet to her left, and beyond it, the beginning of the residential district that lay between downtown and the eastern waterfront. "Where are we going?" she said. Lucian was breathing through his nose, deliberate, managing. "I need to get this data to someone who can act on it before the autoclear on the compliance flag," he said. "Someone with investigative authority. Someone Corvin hasn't reached." Talia looked at him. "You're going to the authorities." "I'm going to the one investigator in this city's financial crimes division who has been trying to build a case against Keth for 2 years and who has never been able to get close enough to their financial operations to make anything stick." He paused. "Because as of 40 minutes ago, I have their entire acquisition trail on a thumb drive in my jacket pocket, along with 6 weeks of account transfers and the testimony of the man who executed them." "Rael didn't agree to testify." "Rael is currently in a server room with Corvin Slate," Lucian said. "By sunrise, Rael's primary concern will be making a deal with whoever offers him the best terms. The investigator will find him very cooperative." Talia thought about this. It was, she decided, probably accurate. "The investigator," she said. "How do you reach them at 4:30 in the morning?" "I have a number," he said. "I've had it for 2 years." At her expression, he said, "Not because I was cooperating, because I was monitoring how close they were getting." "And now you're going to call it?" "Yes." He pulled out the phone, then stopped. He stopped, and he held the phone, and he didn't dial. And Talia watched the hesitation. The genuine hesitation. Not the calculated pause of a man deciding tactics, but the hesitation of a man standing at a line he has never crossed, and understanding that crossing it will change the shape of everything that comes after. The drive in his pocket held the evidence to end Keth's acquisition. It also held the full account history of his own financial operations. 6 weeks of Rael's transfers, yes, but beneath that, the underlying accounts themselves, the infrastructure they had moved from, which was not clean and had never been clean, and which the Financial Crimes Division of Greyhaven's investigative authority would not look at and see only Keth's fingerprints. They would see his too. Everything he had built, the legitimate and the illegitimate, interwoven. The way he had always interwoven them, because separation created vulnerability. And vulnerability was the thing he had spent 14 years refusing to accept. He understood what it meant to hand over the drive. "You don't have to make this call," Talia said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "You have the evidence. You could use it a different way. You could use it as leverage directly against Keth, against Corvin. You could—" "I know what I could do," he said. She waited. The street was quiet around them. A bus passed, first of the morning routes, still mostly empty, its windows yellow rectangles moving through the gray pre-dawn. Somewhere 3 blocks over, the first delivery trucks of the morning were beginning their rounds. The city was waking up. "My father built the first version of this organization," Lucian said. "When I was 11 years old, I watched him make a man disappear because the man had borrowed money and couldn't pay it back. He was looking at the street, not at her. I told myself, when I took it over, that I would run it differently, that the fear would be the same, but the violence would be contained, purposeful." He paused. "I told myself a lot of things." Talia said nothing. "The girl you are," he said. "The one standing on this sidewalk at 4 in the morning because you helped a man who threw you into the rain. You are that person because of who your mother was. What she taught you." He stopped. "What happened to your mother? What happened to you?" He turned and looked at her directly. "Tell me that has nothing to do with the way organizations like mine operate in a city like this one." The bus had gone. The street was quiet again. Talia looked at him for a long moment. "Make the call," she said. He dialed. It rang twice. A man's voice answered. The thick, rough voice of someone pulled from deep sleep, immediately alert in the way of people whose work has trained them to be. "Who is this?" "My name is Lucian Veyer," he said. "You know who I am." A pause. Loaded. I know who you are. I have documentation of a financial acquisition attempt by the Keth organization targeting commercial district infrastructure. 6 weeks of transfers, account trails, source testimony. He paused. I also have the man who executed the transfers, currently located on the 14th floor of the Merritt Tower with Corvin Slate, who coordinated the operation. Silence on the line. Why? Said the voice on the phone. Lucian looked at Talia. Because it's time, he said, and because I'm tired of what it costs. The voice on the phone said, I'll need you to come in. I know, Lucian said. I need 2 hours first. 1. 1.5. A pause. 1.5. Don't move the drive. Don't copy it. Don't let it out of your possession. Another pause. And Veer, if this is some kind of play, it isn't, Lucian said. I'm done playing. He ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk with the phone at his side and he breathed. Deliberately. The way a person breathes when they have done something irreversible and are adjusting to the new landscape that the irreversible thing has created. Talia stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, 1.5 hours. Yes. We need to be off this street, she said. Corvin will have people looking by now. Yes. There's a 24-hour pharmacy on the corner of Callum and Ridgeway, she said. 4 blocks east. Bright lights, public space. No reason for anyone to look for us there. She paused. And I need to redo your dressing. He looked at her. The dressing, he said. You've been moving on it for an hour, she said. It needs to be redone and I have exactly enough supplies left to do it once. She paused. So we're doing it in a pharmacy where I can actually see what I'm working with. He said nothing for a moment, then, all right. They walked. 4 blocks east, and the pharmacy was exactly where she had said it was. Its windows a bright rectangle in the still dark street, the kind of place that is aggressively, almost defiantly ordinary at any hour. The person at the counter was a young man who looked at them when they came in, at the torn suit, at the general condition of both of them, and then looked back at his phone, which was the correct decision and which Talia appreciated. She went to the first aid aisle. She found what she needed and carried it to the back of the store, to the corner booth near the blood pressure machines that people sit in when they're waiting for prescriptions. Lucian sat in the chair next to the machine, and she pulled up the chair from the opposite unit and sat across from him and worked. The wound in better light was what she had estimated from the building. Worse than it had been, not catastrophic, significantly past the point where it needed professional treatment before the infection timeline became an additional problem on top of everything else. She told him this while she worked, in the same flat, informational voice she had been using all night, because information was what the situation required, and the situation had been making that clear since the alley. After you go in, she said, to the investigator, what happens to you? I don't know exactly, he said. The drive has everything. The legitimate operations can be separated. The other parts, he paused. There are consequences. I know there are consequences. I'm not pretending otherwise. Are you afraid? She asked. The question surprised him. She could see it. Yes, he said. Not of the consequences. Or not only that. He was afraid of the specific thing that comes after you have dismantled the structure you have spent your entire adult life building and are standing in the space where it used to be. The fear of the empty ground. Okay, she said. Okay? Being afraid of the right things means you're still paying attention, she said. It's when you stop being afraid that things go wrong. He looked at her. Your mother taught you that too? No, she said. I figured that one out myself. She finished the dressing and sat back. Outside the pharmacy's window, the street was beginning to shift, the deep night quality of it giving way, incrementally, to the gray that precedes actual dawn. Not light yet. The suggestion of light. The city's decision to return to itself. Lucian looked at his watch. 40 minutes, he said. I know, she said. Talia. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she had not yet seen on his face. Not the calculating look, not the controlled look, not the look of revision or assessment. Something more unguarded. Something that had come up through the night's accumulated hours, the way things come up through sediment when the water above it is disturbed enough and long enough. In the alley, he said, I had no reason to expect you to help me. And every time I assumed you would stop, every time I gave you a reason to walk away, you didn't." He paused. "I've spent a long time in a world where people act in their own interest, where help has a price and loyalty has an expiration date." Another pause. "I didn't know what to do with someone who just helped." She looked at him. "You still don't," she said, "but you're getting better at it." Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. His phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. He looked at it, and the almost smile went away. He turned the phone. The message was a photograph, taken from street level, in the pre-dawn gray, showing the exterior of a building she recognized immediately. She had been inside it recently, in the last hour. The Maret Tower's service entrance on the north face. Standing outside the service entrance, flanked by two men, was Corvin Slate. He was looking directly at the camera. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text. "The drive isn't evidence without a witness. I am the only person who knows the full scope of what happened tonight. Turn yourself in with that drive, and I will tell them everything, including your role in every operation I coordinated for 12 years. Turn it over to me, and we both walk." Lucian read it. He read it twice. Talia read it over his shoulder, and she understood what it was. Not a negotiation exactly, but a test. A last assessment of what Lucian Vare was made of, delivered by the man who had been watching him for 12 years, and who therefore knew precisely where the pressure points were. Corvin was not afraid of the investigator. Corvin was offering Lucian the same choice he had been offering him all night, dressed in different clothes, the option to protect himself at the cost of everything he had just decided to do. Lucian's hand was very steady on the phone. He typed back one word: "No." He put the phone in his pocket. He stood up. "We need to move," he said. "Corvin just told me where he is, and he knows the pharmacy is within 4 blocks of the service entrance." He was already moving toward the door. "He'll have the perimeter narrowed down in 20 minutes. Talia picked up her backpack. She followed him out of the pharmacy and back into the gray pre-dawn street, where the light was coming now, genuinely coming, the first real suggestion of a morning that had been a long time arriving. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I have a car," he said, 2 blocks north. A personal vehicle, not registered to any organization account. A spare. I've had it for 2 years and I've used it exactly 4 times. It's clean." He looked at her. If Corvin knew about it, tonight would have gone differently. "One thing he missed," she said. "One thing." They moved north, 1 block, 2. The car was where he said it was. A gray sedan, nothing distinguished about it. The kind of car that exists in every parking spot on every city block, and that the eye passes over 17 times without recording. He unlocked it from 6 feet away, and they got in, and the sound of the doors closing was the sound of the first enclosed, private, relatively safe space they had occupied since the maintenance room in the textile building, 3 hours and a lifetime ago. He started the engine. In the warmth of the car, with the engine running and the heater clicking to life and the gray dawn building outside the windows, Talia felt the full weight of the night begin to arrive in her body. The cold that had been held at bay by movement, the exhaustion that the adrenaline had been covering, the specific ache of a person who has been wet and scared and moving for hours, and has not allowed any of those things to fully register, because registering them would have cost something she couldn't afford. She felt it now. She held herself still against it. Lucian pulled the car into the street and drove. 2 blocks. 3. Then from behind them, from the direction of the Maret Tower, from the direction of Corvin, a sound that did not belong to the ordinary morning city. Not close, not immediate, but present. Talia looked in the passenger mirror. 2 vehicles, moving fast, not marked, no lights, no sirens, nothing official, but moving with a velocity and a directional certainty that had nothing to do with ordinary early morning traffic. "Lucian," she said. He had already seen them. His hands were steady on the wheel. "Hold on," he said. The car accelerated. And behind them, the 2 vehicles accelerated in response, and the space between them and morning, and the investigator who was waiting with 1 hour remaining narrowed to this: a gray sedan on a gray dawn street, a man with a thumb drive in his jacket and a wound in his side, and 12 years of decisions riding on the next 10 minutes, and a girl who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect, and the city opening ahead of them like something that still, despite everything, had not decided how this ended. Lucian took the next corner fast. The tires broke traction for half a second, a brief, lurching skid, and then caught, and they were straight again, accelerating through a block he knew by name, and she knew by the specific geography of having walked it 100 times in the dark. And ahead of them, the city was waking up, and the sky was getting lighter, and the vehicles behind them were still there, still closing, and the drive in his pocket held 6 weeks of financial evidence, and the weight of everything that depended on it arriving intact at a destination that was now 5 minutes away. 4.5. 4. The second vehicle behind them pulled left and began to accelerate around its companion, moving into the adjacent lane, which was a flanking maneuver and meant they were trying to bracket the sedan rather than simply chase it, which meant they were planning to stop it rather than follow it, which meant that wherever Corvin was right now, he had decided that the window for negotiation had closed, and that the only remaining objective was Lucian took the turn onto Meridian Street without slowing. The sedan's rear end swung wide, a half-second of weightlessness where the physics of the situation were briefly in charge rather than any human decision. And then the tires found the road again with a sound like something tearing, and they were straight, accelerating, the engine doing what it had been built to do in a way that its 4 years of careful, anonymous existence had not previously required. Behind them, the flanking vehicle overshot the turn. One vehicle now, still closing. 3 minutes, Lucian said. He was not looking at the mirror. He was looking at the road ahead with the focused attention of a man who has decided that the only direction that matters is forward. The precinct is on Aldine and 14th. If I can get to the main approach, there's a checkpoint on Aldine before 14th, Talia said. Construction closure. Started 2 weeks ago. It narrows to 1 lane. He processed this in approximately 1 second. Which side? West side is open. The east lane is blocked. He moved left. The vehicle behind them was close enough now that its headlights filled the sedan's interior with a cold white wash. Talia watched it in the mirror with the particular stillness of someone who has run out of the kind of fear that makes the body want to move and arrived at the kind that makes the body go very quiet. Meridian to Aldine was 4 blocks. 3. The construction closure appeared ahead, orange barriers, flashing yellows, the single open lane marked by a line of cones that someone had placed with more optimism than precision. Lucian went through it without slowing significantly, threading the sedan between the barriers with a margin that Talia felt in her chest rather than saw with her eyes. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle hit the narrows and braked, not stopped, slowed. 2 seconds, maybe 3. It was enough. Lucian accelerated through the remaining block and swung left into 14th Street, and the precinct building was there. Its exterior lights, its marked vehicles in the lot, its particular institutional solidity, the quality of a building that has stood in one place for a long time and intends to continue standing. He pulled into the main approach at a speed that would have been alarming under ordinary circumstances, and that under these circumstances was simply necessary. He stopped the car. The pursuing vehicle turned onto 14th Street at the far end of the block. Slowed, stopped. It sat there idling, its headlights on the sedan, on the precinct entrance, on the specific situation that its occupants were now calculating. Whatever equation they were running, the result was the same one that most equations produce when a precinct building is one of the variables. They were not going to continue. The vehicle reversed, turned, was gone. Lucian sat with his hands still on the wheel. Neither of them moved for a moment. Talia looked at the precinct entrance, at the marked vehicles in the lot, at the ordinary fluorescent-lit lobby visible through the glass doors, where a desk officer was looking out at the gray sedan in the approach with the expression of someone who is trying to determine whether this is a situation that requires immediate action. She looked at Lucian. His hands came off the wheel. He looked at them briefly. The right hand, which had blood on it from where the wound had seeped through the dressing when he took the turn on Meridian. And then he reached into his jacket and took out the thumb drive and held it. It was a small thing, flat and black and unremarkable, the kind of object you could lose in a coat pocket and not find for 6 months. The kind of object that, in this particular instance, contained the financial architecture of a conspiracy that had spent 6 weeks quietly dismantling everything he had built, and the account trails of his own operations for the years before that, and the irreversible commitment he had made when he dialed the number of the financial crimes investigator and said his own name out loud into the phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he opened the car door. Talia got out on her side. They walked into the precinct together, and the desk officer stood up, and Lucian said his name again, and this time he said it to a room full of institutional light and institutional consequence, and the specific gravity of a decision that cannot be unmade. He said it clearly. He placed the drive on the desk, and the night ended. Not cleanly. Nothing about what followed was clean. Clean endings belong to stories that have been tidied by people who have never had to live through the thing they're tidying, and what followed the drive on the desk was not a story. It was a process, bureaucratic and slow and frequently uncomfortable, involving rooms with recorders and legal counsel obtained at 6 in the morning and questions that covered the same ground 12 times from 12 slightly different angles. Investigator Dale Marsh was not the man Talia had imagined from the brief exchange in the car. He was mid-50s, unremarkable in appearance, with the patient, faintly exhausted quality of someone who has been building a case he could not make for 2 years and is now sitting across from the person who can make it, and is being very careful not to show how much that matters. He was, she decided, after watching him work for 40 minutes through the glass of the waiting area where she had been asked to sit, a man who was very good at his job and who had no particular interest in performing that goodness for an audience. She respected this. Lucian was in the room with Marsh and the counsel and the recorders and the questions. Talia was in the waiting area with a plastic chair and a cup of coffee. Someone had brought her. Her that was bad in the specific way of precinct coffee at 5:30 in the morning. The kind of bad that is so consistent and so expected that it becomes almost a comfort. She drank it. She sat with her backpack between her feet, and she looked at the ceiling and she let herself, for the first time since the alley, simply sit with everything that had happened without trying to manage it or analyze it or make it useful. It was a long sitting. The thing about Corvin's message, about her mother, sat at the center of it. She had told Lucian she would think about it later. Later had arrived. Mara Rook had worked at Greyhaven General for 11 years. She had worked in an ER in a city where the criminal infrastructure that people like Lucian Vare had built ran through every level of ordinary life, through the hospital that treated the people it hurt, through the debts that ordinary people carried without understanding who held them, through the systems that were supposed to protect people and instead had learned to accommodate the weight of organized money until the two things were indistinguishable. Talia did not know if what Corvin had said was true. She might never know, with certainty, whether her mother had reported to anyone, had cooperated with anyone, had made deals that she had then walked away from. What she knew was this. Mara Rook had spent 11 years keeping people alive in a room where they arrived broken. She had taught her daughter how to stay calm when someone was hurt. She had taught her that the moment you start deciding whose pain is worth responding to, you have become less than what you're supposed to be. Whatever else was true, those things were true. And whatever had happened to Mara, whatever debts had come back, whatever pressure had been applied, whatever the relationship between her mother's choices and the machine that had eventually swallowed their life, Talia understood, sitting in the plastic chair with the bad coffee, that she was not going to be able to resolve it tonight, that some truths take longer than one night to arrive at, that the shape of what you've lost changes over time and the shape of what you're going to do about it changes too, and that the most honest thing she could do with the information right now was hold it carefully and let it be what it was, rather than rushing it into a conclusion that would only serve her need for things to be resolved. Her mother had been human, complicated, operating inside a city that made certain kinds of complication nearly inevitable. So was she. So was everyone sitting in this building at 5:30 in the morning. The precinct's glass doors opened and Corvin Slate was brought in by 2 officers, not fighting, not performing composure, just walking with the specific quality of a man who has run the calculations and arrived at the only number the situation produces. He was cuffed. He looked older than he had looked in the warehouse corridor, in the light on the other side of Lucian's door. Or maybe the same age, but arrived at it differently. The way people arrive at the same destination by roads that have cost them entirely different things. He did not look at Talia. He was taken past the waiting area and through a door at the back, and she watched him go and felt nothing dramatic about it. The absence of drama surprised her slightly. She had expected something, some version of the emotion the situation seemed to warrant. Instead, she felt only a kind of settling, like water finding its level. Rail Doss came in 20 minutes later, separately, with his own counsel and his own particular quality of calculation. The man who had executed the numbers, looking at the room and running, even now, the arithmetic of available options. He also did not look at Talia. She wondered if either of them had registered her as a person at any point in the proceedings, or whether she remained, to both of them, a peripheral figure whose existence was noted and then set aside. She decided she didn't particularly care. At 8:15 in the morning, Lucian came out. He looked like a man who had answered 12 rounds of questions after being awake for, she calculated, approximately 22 hours after being wounded, after running through the service infrastructure of the city he lived in and watching the structure of his professional life get submitted into evidence. He looked like that, exactly, without softening or editing. He also looked like a man who had made a decision and was carrying it the way you carry something heavy when you've decided it's worth carrying. Not lightly, not pretending the weight isn't there, but upright. He sat down in the plastic chair next to hers. He looked at the coffee she was holding, and she held it out to him, and he drank what was left of it without comment, which told her something about the state of the last 3 hours. "Marsh," he said. "Yes?" "Good investigator," he said. "Thorough." A pause. He had more on Keth than I realized. The drive gave him what he needed to connect it. "And you?" she said. A pause. "The legitimate operations can be separated," he said. Marsh was clear about what he needed and what he was willing to work with. The other parts, he stopped. "There will be a process. There are things that can't be walked back. I knew that when I made the call." He looked at the far wall. "I knew it before I made the call." "Are you okay?" she asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," he said. "Not right now." He paused. "Ask me in a year." She nodded. Outside the precinct's glass front, the morning had fully arrived. The gray pre-dawn had given way to actual daylight, the flat, washed light of an autumn morning after a long rain, the kind that makes the city look cleaned and slightly raw, as though a surface layer has been removed and what's underneath hasn't quite adjusted to the exposure yet. People were moving on the sidewalk. Ordinary morning people with ordinary morning purposes. A man walking a dog. A woman with a travel mug and a phone. A delivery cyclist threading between parked cars. Talia watched them. "The message," Lucian said, "about your mother." She didn't turn from the window. "I'm going to find out what's true," he said, "what I can verify. Whatever Corvin used as leverage or as a weapon or as a distraction, I'm going to find out what was actually there and what was constructed, and I'm going to tell you, whatever it is." She turned to look at him. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing, and because whatever my organization contributed to your mother's situation, to your situation, I can't undo that, but I can at least make sure you know the truth of it." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. A pause. "What will you do?" he said. "After today." She thought about it honestly. Not the answer that sounded right, but the actual answer, in the actual morning, sitting in a plastic chair in a precinct waiting room with her backpack between her feet and the granola bar she had forgotten about still in her jacket pocket. "There's a community college," she said, "in the East District. They have an EMT training program. I looked at it once last spring before I understood how far the waiting lists were, but there are provisional enrollment processes for people in transitional situations." She paused. "I think I'm going to go talk to them." Lucian looked at her. "That's a good answer," he said. "It's the honest one," she said. "Usually the same thing." She almost smiled. "Lucian," she said. "Yes." "The thing you said, in the warehouse, about your father, about what you told yourself when you took over." She paused. "You knew it wasn't enough, even before tonight. You knew it wasn't enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "So why did it take until tonight?" It was not an accusation. She meant it honestly, as a question, the kind she would have asked her mother, the hard question that gets asked because the answer matters. He thought about it. "Because knowing something isn't enough isn't the same as knowing what to do instead," he said finally, "and because everything I had built was in the way of seeing it clearly." He paused. "And because nobody ever—" He stopped. "Nobody ever made you see it," she said. He looked at her. "Nobody ever stood in front of me," he said, "and simply told the truth without wanting anything from it." He paused. You did that. From the first minute in the alley. You just told me what you saw. She thought about this. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it because it was the accurate thing. I know, he said. That's exactly why it worked. They sat for another moment in the plastic chairs. Around them, the precinct carried on its morning. Phones, voices, the specific organized noise of institutional work being done by people who had been doing it long enough that it had the quality of routine, even when the individual contents of the routine were not routine at all. Eventually, Talia stood up. She put her backpack on. I'm going to go, she said. Lucian stood. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had seen on the elevated platform, the unguarded one, the one that had come up through the sediment of everything the night had disturbed. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. If I hadn't been injured, if you had followed the convoy and seen what the driver did, and if nothing bad had happened to me, would you have found a way to tell me? She considered this honestly. I don't know, she said. Maybe. I would have thought about it. She paused. Probably I would have told myself it wasn't my problem. And then? She thought about her mother, about the quality of a person who had worked 11 years in an emergency room and had never managed to fully convince herself that someone else's pain was not her problem. And then I would have found a way to tell you, she said. Something in his face settled. I thought so, he said. She walked to the precinct doors. She pushed them open and stepped out into the morning, and the cold air hit her. And it was the cold of a city after rain, clean in the specific way that only arrives after a long wet night has washed through. The quality of a place that has been through something and is still standing. She stood on the precinct steps for a moment. Behind her, through the glass, she heard Lucian say her name. She turned. He was standing in the lobby, on the other side of the glass doors, and through the distortion of the glass he looked like what he was, a man at the beginning of something difficult and uncertain, that he had chosen rather than had thrust upon him, which is a different kind of difficult than the kind you spend your life defending against. He didn't say anything through the glass. He just looked at her. She looked back. Then she turned and walked down the steps and into the morning city. The community college was in the East District. She had looked at the address once, 8 months ago, standing outside a library on a day when the idea of having a next step felt more like cruelty than hope. She had memorized the address anyway, the way she memorized the geometry of useful spaces. Not because she believed she would use it, but because letting go of the address would have felt like letting go of something she wasn't ready to release. She still had it. She walked east. The city moved around her, its morning population beginning its morning business, carrying its coffees and its phones and its ordinary weights, each person inside their own particular story, which was invisible to every other person passing them on the sidewalk. She had spent 18 months being invisible in this city, moving through the spaces between other people's stories, and she understood something about it that she had not understood before the night began. Invisibility is not the same as absence. The city is full of people who are seen by almost no one and who see, because of that, almost everything. She had seen the nervous driver. She had seen the lie in Corvin's position before Lucian had. She had seen, in the maintenance room and on the elevated platform and in a dozen moments between, the shape of a man who was something different than what he had built himself to appear. She had also been seen, for the first time in 18 months, and by someone who had started the night by looking through her. She had been genuinely seen, not as a charity case, not as a symbol of anything, not as a complication or a resource or a piece on someone else's board. As a person whose knowledge was real and whose choices had weight and whose history, complicated and painful as it was, belonged entirely to her. That was not nothing. That was in fact the thing she had been without for so long that she had almost stopped noticing its absence, the way you stop noticing the cold after enough hours in it. She had noticed. The community college's admission office opened at 9. She arrived at 8:40 and sat on the steps outside its main entrance in the morning light, with her backpack on her knees and her mother's nursing manual inside it, and the photograph of Mara Rook taken outside Greyhaven General on a summer afternoon 11 years ago, when 11 years still stretched ahead. She waited. At 9 o'clock, a woman in a lanyard and a tired cardigan unlocked the doors from the inside and pushed them open and looked at Talia on the steps with the particular expression of someone who has worked in college administration long enough to recognize on sight the specific quality of a person who has come a long way to be at this door. "We're open," she said. "I know," Talia said. "I've been waiting." She stood up. She went in. The morning was fully established now, and the rain was gone, and the city was doing what cities do after the night has finished with them, continuing. The streets were wet, and the light was flat, and the ordinary work of ordinary lives was underway in every building and on every block. And somewhere in a precinct on Aldine Street, a man named Lucien Weyer was sitting in an institutional room working through the process of taking apart the thing he had built, brick by brick, in the same deliberate way that he had built it, but toward a different destination this time. And somewhere in the East District, in the admission office of a community college that ran an EMT training program, a girl who had spent 18 months being invisible to the city she lived in sat across a desk from a woman in a tired cardigan, and began, for the first time since her mother died and the debts came back and the apartment was gone and the institution stopped answering, to tell someone the true and complete shape of what she needed. She did not make herself smaller to fit the form. She did not apologize for existing. She told the truth in the same flat and specific way she had been telling it all night, because it was the only thing she had ever known how to do, and because the night just past had confirmed, in the most expensive way possible, that it was enough. It had always been enough. The woman in the cardigan listened. She wrote things down. Outside the window, the wet city caught the morning light and held it, and the night, which had begun with a girl pushed into the rain by a man who didn't bother to look at her, was over, resolved not in triumph and not in ruin, but in the complicated, costly, necessary way that real things resolve, through the decisions of imperfect people who chose, at the moment that mattered, to see clearly rather than to look away. Neither of them would forget what it cost. Neither of them was pretending it was over. They were just finally on the other side of it, and that was enough.